Hey everyone, Professor Spencer here. Welcome to the nervous system. In this video, we'll explore the anatomy of a neuron. But first, what does the nervous system do, and what is it made of? The primary functions of the nervous system are to perceive sensory information from inside or outside the body, to process that information, and to coordinate a response to that information. This sounds a lot like the endocrine system, except that it works much more quickly. So for example, if you touch a hot pan, your nervous system detects that heat and sends a signal to your spinal cord, which immediately sends another signal to the muscles of your hand, moving it to safety. All of this happens in less than a second. If you had to use hormones to do this, it would take way too long and you'd be severely injured. So what allows all this to happen? Well, the nervous system is made of nervous tissue. Nervous tissue contains two broad types of cells. The first type of cell are neurons. These are the cells that actually perform the functions of the nervous system. Neurons send information throughout the body via electrochemical signals. The nervous system also contains cells called glial cells. We think of glial cells as support cells. These cells help neurons do their job, but they don't directly participate in the primary functions of the nervous system. Glial cells can provide structural support, immune protection, and even speed up the signal transmission for neurons. We'll have a separate video on glial cells, so stay tuned for that. Alright, let's take a look at a neuron and break down each of its parts. Neurons come in a wide variety of structural classifications, but the one we'll be drawing on the board is called a multipolar neuron. Multipolar neurons are the most common types of neurons you'll find in the body. The other structural classifications are unipolar, bipolar, and anaxonic. These other structural classifications break the rules a little bit, so we're only going to focus on multipolar neurons in this video. We'll save the rest for another video. And again, multipolar neurons are the most common neurons you'll find in the body. So while they come in many different shapes and sizes, there are 5 main characteristics that all neurons have in common, and we'll uncover those as we go through each anatomical part. Up first are dendrites. Our multipolar neuron needs to receive stimulation in some way. To receive stimulation, they have these finger-like extensions called dendrites. They kind of look like trees. Generally, the more dendrites a neuron has, the more stimuli it can receive. So let's give our neuron a stimulus. In this case, let's say it's the arrival of the neurotransmitter glutamate. The cell body, also known as the soma, is this round section that contains the normal organelles you'd find in every other cell. So here you'll find the nucleus, mitochondria, rough endoplasmic reticulum, etc. By the way, soma means body, and knowing this will come in handy as we progress through the nervous system. The position of the soma is different depending on what kind of structural classification we're talking about. In this case, since we're building a multipolar neuron, the soma is here with all the dendrites. The arrival of our stimulus, glutamate, excites the neuron. In other words, it causes an electrical change. That brings us to our first characteristic, excitability, which is the ability to generate a large electrical change. If the neuron reaches a certain level of excitation from the stimulus, in this case glutamate, an electrochemical signal will be generated here. This cone-shaped structure is what's known as the axon hillock. The electrical chemical signal that's generated here is known as the action potential. So remember this. Action potentials are generated at the axon hillock. The action potential then needs to travel down this long and thin projection known as an axon. These axons can be quite long, up to 3 feet. This gives us our second characteristic, conductivity. Conductivity is the ability to move the electrical signal. Now, wait a minute. 3 feet is a long way for an electrical signal to travel. If we touch something hot, and this neuron is what stimulates our muscles to get our hand out of the way, we need this action potential to travel fast. And that's where these cylindrical things come in. These cylindrical things form what is called the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is basically a lipid-based layer of insulation around the axon. You might have noticed that there are little nuclei on our myelin sheath segments, and that's because the myelin sheath is actually formed by cells, but not just any cells. Remember, there's a type of cell that supports the neurons. Therefore, these cells are a type of glial cell. The presence of a myelin sheath drastically speeds up conduction, and remember, conduction means movement of the action potential. In fact, the speed of conduction is sped up so much that the action potential appears to jump to the little gaps in the sheath. This apparent jumping is known as saltatory conduction. Saltatory conduction. These little gaps of exposed axon are called the nodes of Ranvier. The nodes of Ranvier are like little recharge points where the action potential gathers enough charge to continue through another segment of myelinated axon. So our action potential is zipping through the myelinated portions of the axon, recharging for a little bit at a node of Ranvier, and then proceeding down the axon. Without the myelin sheath, the action potential would travel much more slowly down the axon. So if we have a need for speed, we need myelin sheaths. Once it reaches the end of the axon, our multipolar neuron structure splits again into more finger-like extensions, but this time they're called axon terminals. At the end of the terminals are synaptic knobs, also known as terminal buttons. When the action potential arrives at the synaptic knob, it triggers vesicles that carry neurotransmitters to move to the cell membrane. These vesicles then release these neurotransmitters out into the synaptic cleft. The synaptic cleft is simply the space between the neuron and the target cell. And this brings us to our third characteristic of neurons, which is secretion. So thus far, all neurons are excitable, they can conduct a charge, and they can produce secretions. In this specific case of our motor neuron triggering our skeletal muscle contraction, the neurotransmitter that's secreted is acetylcholine. You've probably noticed that we've still got two characteristics of neurons that we haven't covered yet. Those are that neurons simply have longevity, meaning their lifespan is quite long compared to other cells, and finally, neurons are amniotic, which means they don't reproduce very often. Generally, if you lose neurons, it's hard to grow them back. Alright, we've just learned the anatomy of a multipolar neuron as well as 5 characteristics that all neurons have. Let's review with a quick quiz. What part of the neuron contains organelles such as the nucleus, mitochondria, rough endoplasmic reticulum, etc.? The soma. Remember, soma means body. The electrical charge that moves down the neuron is called the action potential. Action potentials are formed at this part of the cell, the axon hillock. Remember, action potentials are generated at the axon hillock. True or false? Myelinated axons conduct action potentials faster than unmyelinated axons. True, myelination speeds up conduction. Remember, if we need speed, we need a myelin sheath. Okay, awesome. Remember, in A&P, repetition is often the key to success, so don't be afraid to rewind the video and watch parts that you didn't get the first time. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, feel free to give it a like and subscribe for more A&P videos just like this. Thanks for watching.